right. Well, why don't we start discussing the types of funding?
Well, I don't know, just from hearing from the room, I'm not sure funding is necessarily in some ways, if we wanted to diverge. So this is something that I've learned in working a little bit with indies, as well as some of our own stuff and everything, is that increasingly it's less about looking for funding, and it's more about trying to figure out how to build ideas that don't require the levels of funding that you're not going to get. It's this balance issue, and I don't think that is well discussed. And, so my friend Zach made Spell Tower. Has anybody played Spell Tower? Nobody? Good. All of you get Spell Tower. It's $1.99. We're going to be raising the price, so get it. But this game, he made it in a week. And it's not, when you look at it, it's a brilliant game, but when you also look at it, you're like, this easily could be made in a week if you could come up with the right thing. I was just playing the other day, 7 Little Words, another game that has done really, really well. But I think that when I see certain types of consistent indie success, they tend to be really based around ideas that were eminently producible. They really understood how to get something done that had a chance. And yeah, we see these bigger things. We hear about indie fund. We could talk about all kinds of different funding pots that you could look through all day long. But I wonder if sometimes the biggest problem is just scoping the work that you're going to do. And I think that's the new trick now. We were just giving a talk, Andrew Walker and I, Andrew used to be at THQ, we were giving a talk on funding at Games for Health conference. And we said we had done all this work, just researching all these different things. And we finally just threw our hands up and we said, the biggest problem right now is, at least on the private side, is that if you're a local investor in a market like Atlanta or Boston or whatever, you're looking at all these like Y Combinator style deals. Y Combinator, $18,000. That's what they get. That's what a Y Combinator team. A Y Combinator founding company just sold to Apple for $35 million yesterday. And we said, these were the traditional angels that were writing $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 checks. And they're like, why should I do that anymore? I can go to Techstars, I can go to these others, and I can jump in on a deal at like $20,000 for stuff that's got huge upside. And so what you see happening now, I think, is a recalibration where people are getting lots of ingenuity around things that can be built really simply. And then maybe they still need some money, but it's not the same thing of like, I've got this big idea, I'm gonna go get this big pot of money, and then I'm gonna be sitting down with my 10 friends and we're gonna build a game. I think other than just being really lucky or writing the right grant at the right time for something applied, those days are just gone, maybe with the exception if the Jobs Act crowdfunding thing comes up or you get wicked lucky on Kickstarter. And if you look at the metrics on Kickstarter, they're going like this. I wonder if we should talk about ingenuity around what to build as the sort of other half of the funding problem, and I don't see it getting talked about.
So I guess what kind of issues are giving, or what kind of issues do people have?
And I'll just say something to follow up with that. I think, the question isn't necessarily how do I get funding. I think the question gets back to how do I make this game and or company, and how can I do it without funding? That's the question you should be asking yourself. Because even as an entrepreneur, you don't want to take other people's money. And I don't say that from an independent side of things. This is purely from a financial side of things. If you give someone else money, or you take someone else's money, you're going to lose money. Because they're going to take ownership from it. So getting funding isn't a win per se. It's a win if you have huge upside and you have to have money to grow it. But if you're talking about making a game that you can produce on your own, how many of you are in the midst of already making a game on your own? And you're saying, okay, how can I get funding for this? The question shouldn't be how can I get funding for this? The question is, how can you sell that? That is your funding. That's where the cash is going to come in.
How can you market it? You have to find your marketing first.
So I think those are those are questions that you might want to start asking yourselves as well. And then the other side of that, another point to that issue would be the difference between, are you looking for funding to develop your game, and are you looking for funding to develop a company? And investors are going to look at those two things very differently.
And funding for games never really existed until recently. Games as opposed to companies.
Right.
That the whole idea of project. I mean, I remember Eric Zimmerman used to be railing and begging for the day where you would have project-based financing like you see in other media areas, and now we have it a little bit, at least with Kickstarter, and also I think with some wealthy individuals who are really just into games and are not necessarily looking for returns. There's about maybe a half dozen of them so far. You don't bother go looking for them. Notch happens to be one. He's funding Age of Wonders from the Netherlands, and the guy who owns xe.com has funded a number of smaller things. So I mean, there is project financing out there, but it's like it's not. I think, but when I meet with indies or meet with others, and when I've really gotten to know some of the deeper indie scene through Zach, I mean, these guys, they don't even think that way. They're thinking like, okay, what is this game that I can make in this set amount of time, and can I prove out to myself that it works, and then can I put it out there? You know, they're masterful at getting their message out if their game is good enough, and that's and you know, for the really really small indies, so I spent some time doing an analysis of the sort of free-to-play, Flash market, Congregate, all that. I mean, that market, these guys, they build something where their top-end investment is like probably $10,000, maybe $30,000 if they're calling it sweat equity. And they'll try to do 3 or 4 games in a year. I mean, so
Is
it's
it smart button games?
what? Yeah, no, these are just like Congregate, Teasy, Newgrounds. I mean, I don't know if you saw Ridiculous Fishing. That's how that got started. So the way that started was it was a little Flash game that Flambeer made, and then they got sponsorship from one of the Flash portals. I don't know if you know how the Flash portal scene works, which is now the Flash, Unity, HTML5 portal scene. There's sort of 3 ways you can make money in that scene. All involve building the game pretty much first. You can build a game, you can put ads in it, you can put it up and see what happens. You can build the game and you can go for some of this microtransaction stuff now a little bit. But what the real hidden thing that goes on among the sort of top 20% tier or more is sponsored. So they build the game, but then they show it around to about 6 or 7 leading portals, Armor Games, Newgrounds, and they will potentially give you about anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 if they're the first thing you see. Go to Armor Games. So it's almost equivalent to the way a number of other portals work, where they're trying to basically they're trying to siphon traffic in so they can then spread it to their other games that they haven't paid any money for and are reaping ad sales off of it. So it's a traffic game. So Flambeer did Ridiculous Fishing, and I forget the name of the portal, but they basically got about $10,000, and then that was like subsistence income for them while they did other things. And then of course, Ridiculous Fishing actually inspired an iOS clone, which then became the iOS game that Flambeer, Zach, and one other person worked on. We had $1 million on it once it was out. So there's this cadre of developers who have learned to build things inexpensively while eating ramen noodles and peanut butter. And I know that seems dismissive, but there's some guys out there that really know what they're doing within those metrics. And then there's just a lot of people who try, but don't succeed. But many of them may just be doing it as a side job. So for them, it's the fun. This is it's kind of what the world has come to.
So let's assume you can't do it. You want to do something that's more involved. Let's say it does require money. Where would you go? What would you do then? Go to the city. Like an actor. It's a dream. Like, if a game is gonna cost a lot of money.
So, well, what's a lot of money these days? I guess let's set the threshold, because to me, a lot of money at this point would be anything over $200,000 for most people. It's not $1 million. No one, I mean, unless you got something really freaking amazing, no one in this room is raising $1 million for their game, okay? I mean, that's not happening. So the trick is, what can you do underneath that? I'd even say never happen.
I might put a scenario out there, say you wanted to hire 5 guys for you for a few months. You needed to finance something like that.
I hope that you can find 5 guys who really believe in what they're doing so that you don't have to pay them as much. That would be the first thing. You know, I mean, right now, I would quote to a client that the average cost per person per month would be between $6,000 and $12,000. So 8 and 10 is very frequent. 7 and a half. I would be looking to pay half that. I would sit down with the team and just say, okay, I need you for 4. We're all going to work really hard for 4 months, or for 8 months, half time. You know, we're going to make this commitment to each other. What's the least amount of money that you need so that you're not freaking out when you go home while you're taking a chance? And make each person sign in blood on what that number is. No, I mean, this is what you have to do. You can't do it any other way. Well, then what other way?
Okay, so I do it myself.
Right.
That is another way. Okay.
That's true. I'm talking about if you want those 5 guys to, you know.
Right, but the answer is, do you really need those 5 guys?
That's
You
a
have
very
tools like
valid
Unity,
question.
and I don't even use Unity, but I can't
Right.
wait till next year where I even get more productive because I can use a tool like Unity.
Right.
And then one programmer, one artist can kick out a game, or actually pretty complex game.
I
In
agree.
a very short amount of time.
3 people did ridiculous fishing part-time. 1 programmer, 1 artist, and 1 sound guy.
I buy all my sound off of Partners in Rhyme.
Right, and this is what I'm saying, is the creative people who are at least sustaining their lifestyle. Let's call it a lifestyle business to start. That's like stage 1.
Right.
Stage 1 is like, just do something because you want to be able to do something, right? Stage 2 is lifestyle business, meaning I'm not making a lot of money. I might even be putting some money in my IRA, but I'm doing what I would love, and I'm not like looking over my shoulder worrying about my mortgage. Stage 3 would be, you know, something bigger than that. And stage 4 and 5 would be like,
Well, you guys haven't even brought up things like, though, if you have the right 2 people, you can go to Microsoft and go, I'm going to build, this is the game I want to build. And Microsoft might throw you enough money to keep you going just to get it on their Xbox Live.
Most likely,
how many games came out on Xbox Live last year?
I don't, and I use that as an example.
But they don't do that.
They don't do that anymore?
it's possible, but unlikely.
It lets you out of
I would
time
say that if you're looking to hire 5 people and you can't find the right people that are willing to commit like you are, the most typical place people look are family and friends. That's going to be the place where you get funding first. And it's even there it's a stretch, and I'm not even sure I would encourage you to do that, because there's, from a kind of an emotional end for you, the amount of stress that you're going to have getting money from people you love and care about, and wanting to pay them back may not be worth it. But this is true not just in games industry, this is true across entrepreneurship. That's where most people are getting the type of money that you're talking about there. An angel investor is likely not going to be interested in it. It's too small, frankly. VC certainly is not.
Not when they can go to Techstars and Y Combinator and see really.
And I would say in the Y Combinators, accelerators, especially in the game industry, unfortunately, are starting to fade.
Yeah.
There are 3 that closed down in the past year and a half in North Carolina, because the space has changed so much in the past 3 years. It's what I read and the folks I talk to have been saying is largely because of crowdfunding sources like Kickstarter, that it's just not as relevant. Putting that type of resource into a game, they're not getting the.
And that's my point, though, is
Yeah.
that you're not. It's not that the Y Combinator is competing with games. It's that those investors, unless they love games, are saying, I can invest in the next Instagram. If I'm playing the lottery, I'd rather play it on something like Instagram. By the way, you can build Instagram for $18,000. You know what I mean? That's the problem. That's the competition.
Yeah, that's part of the
right?
competition. Now here in Atlanta, I know that there are, they've got the Atlantic Tech Village, which is supporting games, and they've got games companies that the Angel Investor Group out of there is supporting. But that's a space where they're not providing you funding. You're actually paying for space there. But it's a good place to go if you're trying to find those 5 others who care about entrepreneurship, who care about games, who might be willing to say, you know what? Outside of my day job, yes, I'm going to give you 20 hours a week to build this game. Because that's what oftentimes it's going to take anyway. Generally in entrepreneurship, what we already know is if you want to make less money than you would elsewhere, work more hours, and entrepreneurship is probably for you. Because that's what happens for entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs tend to, on average, make less than they would if they were doing the exact same job for a company. And they work more hours than they would be if they were doing the exact same job for somebody else. On average. Now that's the mean. Part of the reason why we see so much entrepreneurship though is because the upside is so large. And because people like me and probably like you like to work for yourselves. So, but you need to find people that care about it the same way you do.
There's just a lot of creativity that you need to apply to the game space. This is why I agree with you, is that the people who are getting ahead are figuring out these things, like how to use a certain toolkit and build to just what that toolkit's capable of. I've seen...
Right, whittle down the project.
And also put it in the right creative context.
Right.
I mean, I just did a project for a firm, and they asked me to design something, an architecture for it, and we were able to use Twine, to legitimately solve this problem.
What is Twine?
Twine's just like a simple choose-your-own-adventure text-based markup system, right? And the goal wasn't to build like some big, huge commercial project that was going to make tons of money, but like we got paid to do something. We used a tool that was dead simple, and it's going to work out for them. And I see this time and time again with. Increasingly, I find myself in awe of the people who figure those kinds of little twists and turns out. Like just looking at 7 Little Words, the game. How many people have played this? So 7 Little Words. They have about 12 tiles at the bottom of the screen. Each tile has 2 letters on it, usually 2 or 3 letters. So it's a segment of a word. There's 7 clues, like a crossword puzzle up at the top, and you got to figure out which of the combinations are. I must have played it for like 2 hours the other night. There's daily puzzle packs in it, and I'm like, wow, how well is this doing? I don't know what the App Annie stats are on it. I probably could, but it had 2,700 reviews in the App Store, and I know exactly what the correlation of 2,700 reviews with a 4 or better average is.
That's good, right?
It's really good.
Yeah.
Okay, that means they're probably still doing in excess of $6, $7, maybe $10 or $12,000 a month or more on the App Store with what they're doing, and you couldn't find a dead simpler game to make than 7 Little Words.
Sure.
Really?
I'd love to, because Doug said we haven't really heard from you, and since you've got this Kickstarter campaign going out right now, I mean,
I started launch.
they might. What's your story? I'd love to hear it personally, but I'm sure others would too. Like, how did you start your studio? How did you start your company? Why did you go the route of Kickstarter?
So at Puka Studios, we started. There were 3 of us friends. I had a friend who worked in Los Angeles for a Korean localization company. And I was telling him we're making a game. He's like, well, if you finish it, it's like, I'll put it in front of the CEOs in Korea. And I'm like, oh, well, there's an opportunity right there. So we formalized the company, and we started working on a game, and the team grew. And around the time of January this year, Ouya created Game Jam. I don't know if you guys remember the Ouya. They had a quick game jam. So we did like a prototype game jam game, and then we sat down and we said, realistically, like, is there a game of worth here? Like, that was the question, like, is there a game of worth? And so we changed a lot of the mechanics, and we decided to, we built it into a vertical slice demo. And then that's why we put that on Kickstarter, because if the vertical slice demo isn't going to generate the interest that we want through, like, we don't have the money, so we're not going to be, viral marketing is our strategy. So if that doesn't, raise the money that we need, then what we do is we just take the assets we have, we double the amount of levels, so like an 11 level game instead of a 37 level game, push it out to the market, and move on to the next product. So right now everybody's working based on sweat equity and some shares in the company. I've taken on a brunt, by brunt I do mean a brunt of the fiscal responsibility of the company. Just myself, like we used our equipment in the house, turned the basement into a studio, took on a couple of credit cards just to get for Adobe. I'm not using crack software. I'm not for crack software. So we use a lot of open source software. I bought hardware that minimally meets the specs that we need for the type of games that we do. We used furniture that we already had. A lot of the members are really nice, and they use their own equipment. They're cool like that. It's finding the right people, right? That is key. So over the course of the last year and 10 months, nobody's gotten paid, and we've done events, and what we do for events is we say, hey, look, it's written into the agreement, so if we decide that we're going to do something as a company, and we say, well, we're going to go to this event, right? Well, there's only so much I can take on, so we ask the team to contribute a percentage of their share of the company, right? So for independent games put on the market, they get their share back, but like when we do things like this to help promote games, they put a share forward, right? So it's like a family, it's like a family business kind of. But no, so that's what we did. I don't know if it's a strategy. I think it's a strategy. Is we create small vertical slices, and we determine whether or not it's going to give us a return on our investment, and then build based on that.
It sounds like an investment.
Say again. It's like all the features in the game, kind of just a real short segment that you build for people to play.
The demo that looks so polished, you think the whole thing is done, but it's just a tiny portion. It sounds kind of in some ways like an investment fund, right? And everybody's sort of really into it, and it sounds like you have a very healthy sort of thought of what happens if this doesn't work out. Do you make it to another level? But how do you think? What are you trying to raise on Kickstarter? What's your minimum?
95,000 is our minimum.
And what kind of game is it?
It's an auto-running platformer. Characters and abilities. There's 3 intellectual properties built in that already have their own audiences outside of our audience, which is nice, so we can reach out to those audiences.
So what's an example of that? I think I understood what you meant by it.
Dirigible Days is an independent film out of St. Louis, and there's like a steampunk independent film, and so we put their characters, so you play as the main character, you play as him, the evil guy from the show chases you as a mini boss fight, and so they're in there.
So the hope is that those communities fund the game.
Right.
And just, some of the numbers on Kickstarter to kind of put this in perspective, 95,000, hopefully it'll be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And so, basically, less than half of Kickstarter campaigns are successful. It's about 48%. Kickstarter would report about 44%. In those that are successful, less than 14% raise more than $20,000.
That's fine.
Now that's not video games alone.
In video games alone, those that raise more than $20,000 is higher, 26%. So if you're successful, only a quarter of those in video games are raising more than $20,000. So what you read in popular press is all these huge wins for Kickstarter and huge wins for game companies. But, it's an iceberg. What you're seeing is the best of the best out there. Underneath there, 75% of the game companies that are trying, or game Kickstarters, are raising less than $20,000. So it's just something that you need to know about in terms of if you go that route. Kickstarter, as you all know, the downside is the stress level if you get it, right? There's no financial commitment that anyone's making to you. It's free money, essentially. Now, there's a recent paper that I was telling Rob about. It's an online publication. Ethan Molick out of University of Pennsylvania. He has the entire population of Kickstarter campaigns from 2009 to the end of 2012. He was analyzing the data and the papers coming out. It turns out if you are successful, the default rate is only about 3% of all. This isn't just video games. This is all the Kickstarter campaigns. So most of those who are getting funded on Kickstarter are actually fulfilling their commitment. But the vast majority of them that don't get funded actually do pretty poorly. I think that's what is it.
So if you fail huge.
Miserably.
Yeah.
Like if the mean on the failure is you're raising about 10% of your goal. if you are asking for $10,000, the mean would be you're going to raise about 1,000, which you don't get anyway in Kickstarter. But
Isn't it something like within like almost like a week?
in
right?
yeah.
Within.
And I didn't get the details of how fast you know, but it's fairly quickly. From my own
So
experience.
drink
doing
well
coffee-
tonight, man, because like by Sunday morning,
But
by Monday morning.
you know what you heard from Thomas, which to me is a really big takeaway for you if you're in terms of how you're thinking about funding your company, is they're putting this out there knowing that, hey, we might not get that money. They've got a plan in place. We're going to scale it back. We're going to ship it out quickly. They're testing their hypothesis. They've got a clear vertical slice. Kickstarter is a great opportunity to find out, hey, what kind of feedback are we getting? And then shifting gears if that feedback says, this isn't going to make a return on investment. We shouldn't keep pumping money into this. So if you're looking to hire 5 people, one of the things that I would encourage you to think about is what kind of milestones can you put in place before you say, hey, I'm going to hire 5 people for 5 months and spend $250,000 doing that, and then find out I'm not going to be able to return on investment on that, and I'm already in $250,000. So are there stages that you can put in? There's a lot of research on that kind of development process where you're setting up stage gates of milestones and clear, measurable gates or metrics as to have we succeeded to this point. If we haven't, better to cut your losses and fail fast than it is to fail over time. So one of the other things that I'll just say from the academic research side of things, this isn't for games specifically, but there's a study about a year ago that looks at entrepreneurship and high opportunity cost entrepreneurship versus low opportunity cost entrepreneurship. Basic way to think about it is how valuable you are. Can you make a lot of money elsewhere? And you're probably in the high opportunity cost entrepreneurship, meaning engaging in entrepreneurship is a big cost to you because you could be doing well elsewhere. Those who are engaged in high opportunity cost entrepreneurship tend to fail fast, and when they win big. And so something to think about again in terms of what you're trying to do and how you're trying to get funding. Think about what is the size of this opportunity. And then go at the funding accordingly. And if you can't get funding for that size of the opportunity, maybe it's a good thing to cut your losses. It's not a failure. I would argue, and a lot of people would argue, it's a success to say after 3 weeks, this isn't working out, I need to move on.
I've had some glimpse into Zach's, like, the things he leaves on the floor and codes for like 2 weeks. Looks at it. He sent me a game once and I checked it out and I was like, this is awesome, I'd buy it now. Because nah, it sucks. I don't think it's gonna work. It's not gonna make what I'm making now. And something else. I know I can do better, and he throws it away. Throws away games that I would be fine putting out. And so they and I hear this from others too, but I think there's also this interesting pattern that just struck me, right? So Y Combinator, their average investment is, their top investment's $18,000. Indie Fund, I believe, their average investment somewhere around 20, 25. They've done some bigger ones. Average Kickstarter, 20-ish for some of these. If you think about 2 credit cards, I can do the math, depending on where your credit rating is, that's about $20,000, 3 or 4, if it's less, right? Friends and family, and I mean, unless you've got, Uncle McScrooge there, you probably get about $20,000, $30,000. I mean, so look at the pattern, right? It's like 20K. It's just 20K. And 20K, let's say everybody goes in at, we'll all take $4,000 per person per month. That's 5 man months that you can kind of buy for 20K. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. I mean, it seems pretty easy to sit and say in that template, where can I be at the end of that template? Can I be shippable? Can I be kickstartable? Can I be pitchable? I mean, can that, where am I in my launch status? And what I would tell you is there's a whole cadre of successful people who actually can launch on that, and you're competing against them. There's a whole cadre of people who have been able to turn that into something bigger, rarer, but you're against all of that. I mean, that's the reality if you want to build your game, or you want to build a game and sort of build a game company. If you want to build a business and you're less interested in building what you want to build, I think actually it can be a little bit more realistic to go after other sums of money. So this would be things like SBIR grants with the government, other types of things that you can choose, but you've got to be willing to really decide that you're in business to make stuff, not necessarily what you want to make. And then you can chase some of these larger pots of money around the 100, 200, 300 level, but you're in competition for grants, you're in competition for work for hire projects, you're in it's more contracting oriented. And then some companies some teams try to do that and then on the side build their game. So the Eitan Kleiner, he built their puzzle game, what was it? It was a PS4 game. They did it by building, they took contract work from friends in Boston from places like Demir's and others. That's what put in that floor, like everybody's gonna take home enough money to pay rent and buy groceries, and then we're gonna work on our other game. And they must have been very disciplined about how they did that, and then how they still had, because that's the other problem that you'll deal with in entrepreneurship, is you start taking contracting work, and you kid yourself that you're like Google and you can do something with that 20% time, and you don't. So the ones that I've met who are able to do that are really good at separating that church and state relationship.
I think it's also important and if you go that route, you're very normal. This isn't a bad thing. I think I've talked to almost 100 entrepreneurs now over the past 2 years in the video game space alone. And that's a very common story. What's also common in those conversations I have is a certain amount of guilt associated with, but I'm supposed to be only making my game, and how can I get funding just to do that? When it's very normal to be contracting out and working a side job at the same time you're making a game. And I don't mean normal just from entrepreneurship, but just normal for game developers. I mean, are you guys familiar with the company? And I'm not terribly familiar. I was reading about them 2 days ago about Ilphonic out of Denver. They do really quality work, and they just announced they've got to do contract work. To make
wrong with contract.
Yeah. To be
The only thing wrong is if you don't have the discipline where it eventually spills over, and that's all you're doing.
And then I think you'll probably feel disappointed if the whole purpose behind it was to make your own game or to do your own company, and you're doing this on the side to make ends meet. That's okay. So my dissertation, I surveyed video game startup companies over a long period of time. But since 2009 alone, of the 245 respondents, 80% of them were self-funded.
And Kickstarter is getting closer.
Kickstarter was crowdfunding sources only represented 5% of them. Which sounds very small, but you have to understand these are startups that I'm looking at. Not all games on Kickstarter are coming from startups. They're coming from established companies, established people. Those are the ones you read about anyway. They're not, hey, this is my first game and I just raised over $1 million. No, that's not happening. These are people who've been in the industry for 20 years raising money.
Because they have audience. They have audience.
So government funds, 10%. And it's actually good. SBIR grants are a great way to do it if that's what you want to do. But there's a whole, with those comes a lot of bureaucracy. There's applications, still very, very competitive.
I'd say 10% was high. I'm impressed to hear that number was that high among the firms you surveyed.
7% over time, but over the whole time. But
still high.
Yeah, I was surprised by that too. So there's lots of different pathways. And I just, again, I'll come back to Ethan's work at Kickstarter. If you go that route, your network it's intuitive, right? Your network's really important. So he chooses to look at Facebook friends as a metric of how large your network is. It's the best measure he had looking at Kickstarter campaigns. It turns out if you've got a small network and you're on a campaign versus not having a Facebook account, you're worse off. That's how important having a large network is. You're worse off if you have no Facebook account going on Kickstarter than if you are in the lower quartile of Facebook friends of those posting on Kickstarter. So size of the network matters because guess who's giving to these campaigns? It's not a whole bunch of people going to Kickstarter just trolling around to give to you. They are giving to the established people, but they're not, unless you have name recognition already, they're not just going on looking, hey, who's the best? Unless you happen to get a featured account, and then that makes a huge difference as well. So it's really your friends and family, same people that you're going to go to and say, hey, will you give me $1,000? You're just asking for more of them to give you less.
Or you're asking for that smaller group to give you less because of all the overhead through Kickstarter rather than if they just sent you
Right.
$1,000 check in the mail.
Or if you've got a community, like Thomas was saying, he's already got these communities built, even if they're not part of his own personal network. It's already a community in place.
That's what it's going to take on Kickstarter going forward for people who have an okay network but not great. I mean, so I'm impressed to hear about that. Those three communities are either going to step up and make your number or they're not.
Well, I think all of them did Kickstarters, and the amount that they would get from our Kickstarter doubles more than what they did for their Kickstarter. So they're invested in wanting it to succeed. And plus, the IGDA, if you're able to successfully get approved by the IGDA, then you can promote it on every single chapter page of devs. And we've done a lot of our rewards are us showing videos of how we're making the game. So I'm hoping that's incentive to the game development.
And I think, what I heard Thomas talk about is how much time did you put in before you even went to Kickstarter?
So the game, the demo for Game Jam, which wasn't the initial concept, that was the 10-day Game Jam create. And then, we spent about, half a month to a month. And remember, this is their off time. This isn't, and I have 23 members, so they can't all be in my basement at one time. So they get once they're throughout the week. But so it took about a half a month for us to say, okay, this is going to be a real game. We're going to do this, and then probably another month of design time after that. Then we created not just a demo level, not a vertical slice demo, but just a demo, just a prototype demo of not the rhythm game, but the actual game for C2E2, and that happened in April, I believe. And then since then, we've been building on the scope of the game. So I mean, it's been
You've got a good story plus potential, right? I mean, you're not just three guys in a garage anymore. So,
negative, no.
So somebody looking at you. I mean, I've invested a little bit in some local people, and you have more potential. I mean, I've even debated whether I'm going to keep you $20 to $50 or something. But that's because
Stop debating, just give it to them.
That's because you have potential. Is my point. You have an interesting story. And I think that'll help. I'm flipping a coin. I think you're going to make your 95,000. But I'd like to find somebody to bet up, $5 if I could take them.
You want to
Kickstarter side bets?
Yeah.
Wait, this could be a business.
So
out for that.
yeah.
So you
Three
kick
other
track. So kick
suggestions.
track would take bets, and then if the house wins, then this could be interesting. Anyway.
So three other things if you're thinking about doing
Yeah.
a Kickstarter campaign. So video, which seems very, most people do, about 86% of them did, but it makes a huge difference. Those who don't do videos have a 26% less likelihood of getting funded. Post a update within the first 3 days. Those who don't are going to decrease the likelihood of being funded by 13%. So make sure you update fast and update regularly if you can. And it sounds really silly, but spelling errors.
Sure it does.
So one way to demonstrate that you're prepared is by having something without spelling errors, or any other way. The whole construct or idea is being prepared when you go to one measure of that would be spelling errors. Well, those with spelling errors are 13% less likely. And most of them
95% less likely if it's a word game.
and of those with spelling errors, the vast majority only had one spelling error. So we're not talking about someone posting up there and having grammar errors everywhere, just having one word misspelled.
Spell Kickstarter with a Y might just do it up.
So just so I know we've kind of come from this perspective of hear a lot
Just
of
don't
other
make a
things to
typo
be
and
thinking
type
about.
Kickstarter.
But that doesn't mean you can't go the route of Kickstarter, right? And if you do decide to go there, be prepared. And I think Thomas's story is a really good setup. Let's hope he succeeds, and then we can all sit back and look at this and say, see, the things he was doing really caused this.
You have to take it serious. It's not, you just don't go willy-nilly. depending on what you want out of it.
And that's true when you go to your friends and family too. So this is the advice that I think we're all giving you too. And the story of Thomas and Kickstarter is that you wouldn't go to your friends and family with an email that had 5 misspelled words in it saying, "Please give me $1,000."
Unless it was a ransom note.
Unless, then it might be on a typewriter and taped onto a piece of paper.
We're running the government.
You wouldn't go to your friends and family without having some sort of, prototype. I mean, going to somebody and just saying, "I have this great idea," what's the likelihood of getting funded? And you're wasting your time trying to get money when you could be in development or scrapping that idea and moving on to the next one.
What does it cost to run a Kickstarter campaign? As far as, but you need a video, a movie, that'd be pretty good.
It depends on how complex you want to go with it. I mean, there's the cost of developing the product, whatever the product is. Then there's the time that you spend developing the content that goes into Kickstarter to sell it, and the time that you spend marketing it, how you market it. So all that's time, and it really depends on what kind of team you have generating it. I mean, I'm fortunate in the fact that our team is invested in the idea, so we're in it together in that respect. So getting the right people.
If you're small enough, if your game's small enough, the advice is just finish the game. Don't do Kickstarter.
I mean, you could do one.
Finish the game and then do Kickstarter.
That's
That's very dark.
We're going to see.
I mean, I would say it's hard for Ethan or anybody to know, but it would be an amazing stat, even if it was almost done by like 3 fairly good team judging eyes. What percentage of successful projects look like they were pretty much done? That it was just a matter of, especially if it's just all of Kickstarter. I bet it's increasingly going up. That this sort of Kickstarter is just it's almost like the whole thing's in the bag. Oculus and Ouya, those things were already ready to go. They knew what they went to Kickstarter because they thought it would be PR, and they became something more than that. I mean, Ouya was going to raise money in the Valley one way or the other.
Ethan Mollick, who wrote that, has a Kickstarter data set. He talks about it in the paper.
Yeah.
And those going in with a finished product is a great idea for Kickstarter.
How do you get those?
It's a great marketing tool, even if it's not fundraising tool.
He uses grad students.
How do you know?
That's how
How do you get? I'm in a business where I can't get metrics.
How do you get the data?
For what?
Because I can't.
For what? For Kickstarter?
No, for my download sales, for instance. I get them for my own, but I can't tell. It's not like movies where they tell you how much
you can get it. You can get them. They're a lot of money.
Yeah.
So not for Kickstarter. For Kickstarter, unless he got cooperation from them.
I think he has.
He might have because he's at Wharton, but also he could just he can scrape some of that.
I think he scraped.
Yeah.
The way it was written
When
out
you say
is
scrape, what do you mean by that?
it's all publicly available data that's posted on the website. So if you track it for 3 years and have literally a graduate students going every day and pulling down the information,
But then you're still just guessing. Like for instance,
guessing at what?
my biggest distributor is Big Fish Games.
Right.
I would love to be able to get all the metrics off of them. They won't give them to me.
No,
I don't
they
know
won't,
but you can't get them. They don't have any sales numbers posted.
You can get sales numbers for iOS and Android games.
That's very
And you could buy.
expensive.
It's about $15,000 minimum for Map Annie or Flurry.
And then there's the European company which I tried to buy it from too. I forget the name.
And how do they get them?
Yeah.
They buy
They
them from
but they have an algorithm, and so what they do. So in the case of App Annie, so we're Spell Tower signed up for App Annie, and so we basically give them our sales numbers in exchange for them to track everything for us.
Okay.
So that we can do our own otherwise we'd be downloading those stats every day, and it's a pain in the ass. So App Annie knows our sales.
Okay.
And so essentially the EULA is that App Annie knows what we're doing, and so they could tell us.
They know enough of other people's too.
Right? Yeah. It's a quid pro quo.
Okay.
And so then other people can buy. But I know, for instance, what our ratio. I went and looked at it for Zach, and I know the ratio of what the reviews are and his sales, so I can look at other people's, status, and I can know roughly what they're doing.
Do you get daily sales on the iOS store?
Yeah, daily.
I can't get those. I get them a month, and I get them 45 days after the month closes.
But that's big fish, though, right?
All my distributors.
Yeah. Well, not app stores, but you're
I'm
not
not
on
on the
app
app. I'm
stores.
just PC downloads. So-
Right.
So we've been talking a lot about funding and funding for the first project or first game. Are there any numbers or hands-on, if you succeed on the first one or do all right on the first one, if the second one's any easier to get funding for?
All my next survey, that's my next study.
That's a good study. I would say this much: if you can prove to anybody who has capital, whether it be a Kickstarter person with $25, a family member with $2,500, or a local entrepreneur with $20,000, or a VC with $2 million, if you could show that you definitively made money and you still have a team that can do the same thing, then your chances should go up. That doesn't mean that situationally you luck out, but your chances should go up. I mean, success should breed success. Doesn't always, but yeah, your chances should be better.
But if you're successful, why would you need them?
Well,
Right?
that's a different
Maybe
question.
you're back to you don't want to take the money. If you're successful enough, you want to fund your next project or not.
And that's what most of the self-funders who are successful do. I I look at how much money Ridiculous Fishing has made. I don't think Flambeer more or less will take money from anybody, just on that. They did take some help from Mike Wilson's new startup for publishing for Lufthausers or Luftbrausers. But I think they made a calculated decision that while they didn't necessarily need money to make the game, they did need some money to exploit it across multiple platforms at once. But I guarantee you they still brought an intense amount of leverage to that project because they could potentially walk away from a bad term sheet.
Drop me an email. I think I have some data that I can tell you a little bit about if you're really interested. But it's going to look at how much experience entrepreneurs have in the past before starting theirs. I can tell you at least in my dissertation data, which is where this all comes from, having more experience doesn't necessarily make you less or more prone for killing your first project of that company.
A question, on kids' storybooks apps on Google Play or iTunes, on a popular one, what's a typical successful download rate per month? Would you know what that is?
Not on that particular thing, but you could go look at, probably if you looked at App Annie or Flurry, you might be able to start to get a sense. It might be entirely situational. I could say this much from what I roughly know. If you're getting anywhere over 500 paid downloads a month on an app store, you're doing really well compared to the majority of things on said app store. No, but you got to remember, look at the sheer volume of things that are out there. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that that's necessarily great, and that there aren't a decent number of things making, on an absolute level, if we're counting versus percentage, there's a lot of things that are probably doing slightly better than that in either in-app purchase or otherwise. But in general, the vast majority of things that are up there, app or game, are making less than that.
Right. It also depends on what type of game you're making. So it gives the example of Per Blue, which is a MMORPG. They only have 15,000 active users. That's their primary user group. They make 50 cents a day on average on each user. And that was a year and a half ago. So their metric is very different from a metric you might have. So I just
storybooks for kids is probably a whole
The other
nother-
thing to think about for your own, I think for your own business and your own game is think about what makes sense for you.
But
You can get the data, but if it's not realistic for what you want to accomplish or what you can accomplish.
look at Toka Doc, though. Toka, this company, makes really dead simple games for what essentially amounts to probably 3 to 6 year old kids, and they make boatloads of money. They also got
Who
really
is that?
smart about advertising.
Toka, what?
Toka, they just got bought by, they just bought another company. They just bought Tickle Tap apps, Zinc Road out of Toronto, which made similar stuff but hadn't been as successful. What Toka did that was really, really interesting was they really figured out how to maximize ads in support of their app sales. Somewhere along the line, they took a huge chance and it paid off for them. And I usually see two things when I'm looking at what's going on out there. Is like what you mentioned with the 15,000 users and getting 50. they're either really, really creative. They found like they really found something to hone in on, like that particular model or something. They're usually outliers in some really, really interesting way. Or they took really, really big chances on something that to market, like I think in this case of the Toka company out of Sweden, I think they just rolled the dice and advertised like crazy and it paid off.
And that's the 3 to 6-year-old market?
Yeah, they really are targeted at parents.
TOKA?
It's TOCA, I believe, yeah.
Would you call, excuse me, I want to know if this Toka company would you consider them what I call commodity driven? In that they sell the same thing over and over. Think Sudoku books, right?
No, they actually are doing a really good job of making some of their stuff I'm not a big fan of, but I mean the production value is amazing for what they're targeting. I can totally see why it's selling. Toka Train is really cool.
Is it all little simple games?
Yeah, but you gotta try them. I mean, things stand out. Things that are doing really, really well. There's something that's really obvious about what they did or the chance they took, and then you just go, yeah, it makes sense.
But they will have more than one.
They have like a
right?
bunch of apps. That's another thing that you see among it's very interesting at the very low end of entrepreneurship. People are building things for $3,000, $6,000, $12,000. What you notice about the ones that are sustaining, even if they have duds, is over the last 3 years they've built like 20 or 30 things. And so they're getting a sort of cumulative effect of sustainability. And maybe 1 or 2 of them are their real strengths. So
it's a different business model.
It is a very different and it's
you
a
have
brutal
to ask yourself,
business
what are
model.
you trying to accomplish? What are your goals as an entrepreneur?
Shotgun approach.
Yeah, they're really good at doing it. Though.
Has
They're
anybody
really
done
good at it.
anything, subscription? Can you think of any subscription examples? Again, sort of like this, where they put out a product. but the
7
product
little
is-
words.
Oh, good example, yeah. But they keep, okay, so they have the thing a day, but do people pay for that, or do they?
Yeah,
just-
no, the puzzle packs, the things I think it's like basically the last 2 days are free. So if you get in, but if all of a sudden you're hooked on those last 2 days and you want the previous 30, you pay.
Okay,
So that,
okay,
yeah, it's just like CrossFit.
yeah, okay.
I just want to go to like way back earlier when you guys were mentioning subsisting income, kind of going that route of not necessarily looking for funding, but looking for avenues of starting that subsistent income with relatively small games. I was wondering what avenues are available, because the only one that I remember you guys mentioning was the major portal sponsorship kind of deal.
App stores, I mean, anything where there's no barrier to getting into the market is what you're talking about. I mean, you should go spend some time on the, if you really want to see the mentality of people who live at the bottom of this rung successfully, go read the Moki ads message boards. And they're illuminating what these guys talk about doing and how they do it. They're like, yep, as soon as I know I've spent $4,000, whatever that is, not money out of pocket, but whatever represents $4,000 of their time, they're like, I'm either done or I'm on to something else. Like, Moki ads. So Moki ads and CPM Star are the 2 biggest browser-based ad networks. And there's just an incredible culture of people up there who have, figured out how to write things really inexpensively. I mean, stuff that,
And they've got it down to a science. too.
They've got
They know
it to a science,
exactly
yeah.
the price point, which if we put any more money into development of this, we're not going to make money.
Right.
So again, part of this, I think for this session specifically, if you take one thing away, is you have to think about this from a business side of things. You have to think about it from a return on investment if you're interested in funding a game or funding a company. Because even if you get your game funded, you could still lose money. Getting your game funded is not the end goal here.
I think what's amazing to me about some of these people, whether it's successful indies or these sort of bottom feeder, it's kind of an insult to them. I mean, what I mean is that they're really, really sophisticated at what they're doing. It may look like you may be reading a Moki ad in board at some point saying like, how are these guys making money at like $4,000 games? This seems, and the games they're making are so stupid. I would never want to put my name on that game. I totally agree with you. I get it, right? Like, I get it. But just know that they make that work really well, and they flood that zone, and now they establish that floor. And I have 2 young sons, 6 and 9, and they play everything from the high end to my son Ames, who's 6, plays on Keezy.com or whatever it's called. God, I gotta keep up with it. He plays like, he's played a bunch of the Stickman games. You laugh, right? Like stick figure, like guys, like Ashley. They do phenomenally well. He wants me to subscribe. He loves it.
Like McPixel.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy some of the stuff these like sort of 6 to 12-year-old kids will find. And when I go in and analyze the games, actually there's some really, there's one that, it's like a tower defense game, and it's just, it's awesome. I found myself playing it for 4 hours. And you know, but on the outside looking in, as a game developer, just glancing by, thinking about like high art and making games, I've been like, oh, this is so stupid. Why would I ever want to make that? Meanwhile, the guy on the other end is just like laughing his ass off at me, right? Like thinking that way, like, go ahead. Go spend 6 months and $40,000. I'll have put out 6 games by then, making, and I'm not saying that's what you need to come down to their level, unless you can figure that out and that's exciting for you and you find a really cool way to make it work. Just know that that's what other people are doing, that it's gonna make it harder for you to do what you're doing. And so you gotta really realize that you've gotta be stupendous.
Let me just give you some background on why I'm asking, and then kind of just tell me your thoughts about it if you don't mind. Like, you know, where I am right now, like as a sophomore in college, I can't put that many hours into a game or go looking for like a core team to start making that kind of thing. And I feel like if I and a team of like people who thought it was a good idea to go and start trying to make subsistent income, and then eventually work our way up to kind of funding ourselves through that, but at the same time kind of doing like mini projects, see how we work together, put our free time into something that might actually give a return on investment. I feel like that might be a good avenue for just starting a game.
Especially when you're in college, right? And your parents are paying for that roof over your
Share
head.
my experience with trying to get guys together, see if we jive well. Without that team is going to drift apart really quickly. So if you were just doing projects just for the heck of it, those guys are going to disappear on you real quick.
I think having some clear measurable milestones, back to what I said before, if you're going to go that route, you have to have something kind of big rather than just very open-ended, to truly be able to even learn from that experience what you might be able to apply later. So you all have participated in game jams, I'm sure. So the last one was the Games for All Jam, but the Global Game Jam of 2013. So I did some research there, and it turns out about 20% of those teams, you may have already heard me say this before, but about 20% of those teams go on to continue game development after that 48 hours. And about, if you guys like, go back to the numbers to show about 8% of those monetize those games.
That's a really good
I
return.
mean, that's 48 hours of your time to get to know folks and continue work. And you may end up with something that you get to monetize, or you may be building a company. You may be working on it. Whether it's that project at that game jam or it's another project, because you've learned about each other's skill sets. That's a really important lesson to learn in a very short amount of time. The other thing I would say, I don't mean this in any disrespect, but if you can't do it when you're a student, when are you going to have the time?
I wish if I knew now
What
that
I
I would go back to being a student, 4 years in college. Oh my God.
Even
I
if
wish
you're
they
paying
didn't
for,
keep punching
I'm not, and I don't mean to disrespect how hard it is to be a student. It is incredibly hard to be a student. I fully appreciate that. But every stage in your life moving forward at this point
Comes with a mortgage or a rent.
well, even if you're paying rent right now as a student, life doesn't get easier typically. It may not get harder, but it's probably going to stay at the amount of difficulty it is right now. Unless you make all that money and then you get to live a little bit easier. So,
But you know, I'm increasingly amazed though about the number of people just building games just literally for the fun of it.
and that's
And that I think is actually even just as significant.
And that's my point. It's like, this is a great time. It's a wonderful time, just like it would be in 5 years, and 10 years, and 20 years. You know, I haven't stopped doing things because I have 2 children and have a job. I do them still, but I have to make different choices. And you're gonna have to
You know,
make
but
different.
I mean, the fact that you're trying to teach your son C++ right now because you need another programmer.
Right. It's true, he is only 3.
Yeah.
He's still learning, you know.
And there's another motivation for
Python,
actually,
maybe
Right,
for
Python.
completing, for doing, working on a game in college, okay? If you finish something, you actually have a completed project that you can actually demo and it doesn't crash, that will actually get your job offers someday.
Yeah.
And you ought to think about it in terms of that. Forget the monetization, just actually finishing something.
And it's the
Start
same
to
thing
finish
with
with a
Kickstarter.
group.
I mean, it
To
comes
be
back
honest-
to the who's successful, really successful in these Kickstarter campaigns, they have a history. And what you're doing right now as a student, building your history. It's a great time to do it. So I wouldn't, again, I don't mean to disrespect what you said in terms of how hard things are, but really give it a go now. And that goes for any developer at any point. If you think about entrepreneurship, there's no better time to do it than right now. You just have to figure out the limitations of how much time you can invest in.
We've got a little time left. But can you talk a little about grants? I mean, is it feasible?
It is, and I think Ben probably has more experience with his clients. I mean, I've watched folks, when I was at the University of Wisconsin, go through the grant process a lot, because you've got a lot of game companies at each university going, and those around the university do a lot of grant work.
It's getting much, there are more grants being given at the SBIR level, and by that I mean, SBIRs are sort of the main sort of small business innovation research grants that are given out. There are more of them being given out because games are becoming an appreciative way to poke at problems. And so therefore, it doesn't mean that they're putting out more grants saying we want a game, but they are putting out more grants that say that essentially people are applying to saying I can solve this problem with a game, and those are getting more reception.
Just to give you some background, SBIR grants are government grants by different departments within our government that are for basic research and then phase 2, which are commercial, taking to commercialize. But they're based upon problems. It's not like we're giving out a grant to make a game.
Yeah, it's not like, make whatever you want as long as it's a game. It's more like, for instance, there's one out right now. We are looking for innovative ways to teach kids what it means to be in a research study. So, for instance, kids, when you, like, if you,
Or those.
So they're looking to solve a problem that the government doesn't communicate well with kids to make them comfortable about being in research studies. It's an important need for any kind of science. I mean, whatever it may be, and they're looking for an innovative way to talk to kids. And one of the things among a long list is games. My sense is they probably should do a movie, but whatever. So you can get some money that way. It's increasingly, but it's also increasingly becoming competitive. There are a number of places, I just call them cyber shops. They exist literally to write and win these things, and they've got it down to a science, and it's getting very, very competitive.
And what you find in those shops is there are a lot of academics who are actually still at their university, and then they have
walk
a
across
side
the street,
business to do research grants to fund the research. They constantly apply, a lot of times what they do is they apply to phase 1, which is basic science, proof of concept. They even get assigned to phase 2, and they may do it, but they have no intent of commercializing it, which is the intent of phase 2. And then they go right back into phase 1, applying for basic science research grants again. So you're competing against this group. If you're thinking about doing it from a for-profit standpoint, you're competing against this group that's what they do.
Well, in an SBIR, they're all supposed to be for-profits, but the professor can walk across the street to their for-profit side. But the bottom line is there are opportunities. It's just like everything else, just like Kickstarter, they're increasingly competitive. And even then, writing an SBIR grant successfully is probably about a $10,000 endeavor in terms of funding, of which you have a 1 in 10 shot of winning in general. So
It's tough.
Just so you know, that sounds really similar to like the health jobs that you just is that like on a lower scale?
yes, and that's why you're actually seeing not only the government but other private foundations do these things like jams and challenges, because they're trying to break free of the communities that exist and that tend to be it tends to be the same cloister community that gets good at it, and so they're trying to find other mechanisms to push and find other people doing things. They tend to be at lower levels, but then those become stepping stones. States also will have small grant competitions, somewhat easier to win, but you'll get maybe $5,000 to $20,000, but they're essentially stepping stones because they want you to then prepare to get that $100,000, $200,000 SBIR, then the phase 2, which can be like $500,000, $1 million, and so.
I think Andrew did talk about that just the other day, just to make sure you guys
Yeah.
are getting all the different ones. Another way is just to compete in contests and raise money through that to fund your other development.
And there's
there are,
a ton of them.
yeah. So that is it's another route you could go to raise money. It's just to keep competing in contests, try to raise money that way.
Like the incubators and universities.
Well, all right, so GSU is a business planning competition, but there's all sorts of competitions out there that are specific to games that you could just submit your game to and go compete and win $10,000, $15,000, $100,000. You know, Tripwire won the contest. What was the name of that contest? Others know.
Make something unreal.
Make Something Unreal contest, and Tripwire here in Atlanta, they won that. They didn't make as much money as they thought. You know, it's not the $1 million that you might think. But they turned that around, and by winning that, they got all this notoriety and were able to develop a community of supporters.
Interesting. The Tripwire never was able to raise any money. We tried.
Yeah, and they actually mortgaged their homes to,
When they're most successful, probably most successful.
at least here in Atlanta.
One of the places in the city.
So, you know, again, you're not alone if you go the route of mortgaging your home.
Please
ask
don't
friends
do
and family. I don't think it's the best advice either. I would agree. Think through it before you do it.
I'm not a certified financial planner. Recommend you don't.
So do within your means, right?
But that's the number one mistake I see people making. If I could go back in time to my younger self, I would go back and say, there's this really cool way of thinking about building something that is built to this smaller box. And I really think you could actually start to chart the ascendancy of that as a skill in this economy. That people have really started to get much, much smarter about building that minimally viable product. And I think that that's the new form of competition now. And I don't think that's just in games. I think that is, aside from a few industries across the board, what's going on out there. And I think the fact that you're seeing this bifurcation of the investment community between, it used to be that there were early seed venture capital companies, and they're almost all gone because they've been replaced by these Y Combinator, Techstar, super angel type groups, and it's hollowed out. Like it's almost the day of raising like $2 million from a VC is just gone. It's either these huge amounts or these really, really tiny amounts.
And then all likelihood, where Ben started with that is that world anyway is just highly unlikely. You read about it all the time because it's in the news. But the percentage of entrepreneurs that are getting VC funding is less than 1%.
Well, for starters, they raised funds $200 million in this room with 500,000.
Which is why they're actually, in some ways, investing in these other groups and just saying, look, here, Y Combinator or whatever, take a couple of million of our own money, and then we'll cherry pick whatever
The
we
one
consider.
that comes through out of the 14.
Yeah, that's-
boring.
So you're getting this pass on, like bookies laying off bets in reverse. And I think that the other part of this is this the other thing that's kind of interesting is they're starting to see pools of capital, whether it be accelerators, incubators, small groups, that are setting up these verticals. Okay, so for instance, Kaplan just did an accelerator with Techstar that was only for educational technologies, but within there are several game guys, and I know at least one, if not two of them, who got funded, and they got, I think it was like 14 weeks and about $30,000, which was pretty good, and but it's for an educational technology type game startup. It's not show up with your RPG, so there are these verticals now, and you could potentially look for those. But I think that some smart game developers will build, some of the people who smartly chase down this money are people who are really good at building things, and they're willing to go and build things in the areas that the money is asking for. And that's not necessarily mean that's for you, but for others there are. I know some guys who used to build entertainment stuff. They saw some opportunity to build something in education. There was capital looking to make investments in that space, and they walked right up and they said, "We can build what you want," and they landed that $4.5 million of VC. And they were perfectly happy building a really great business out of it. They just parked aside that they've been building real-time strategy games for 4 years. They'll probably go back to doing that.
How's that? We're over the hour. One more question? No, there's none. Let's go.
Sounds good.
Well, good luck.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.